I'm Chauncey Navarro. Welcome back to Inspired Word. We've been going through the book of the Revelation of Jesus. We started in chapter 20, and we basically started to touch on the Millennium Kingdom, this 1,000-year reign of Christ. And we touched on it in the last video. Now we're going to be leaving the book of the Revelation of Jesus and doing a quick sum up of what's going to be going on during this Millennium Kingdom in the Millennium Temple in the Old Testament. Now, I can't, obviously, to do a short video here. I spent 2 months doing classes on this before, and this would take too many videos to do the whole thing. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to do a little bit of an overview sum up of some of what's going to be going on during this Millennium reign in this temple that's where the sacrifices are going to be performed during the 1,000-year reign, the Millennium Kingdom, where Christ rules and reigns on the throne as the great prince who reigns from the temple. His throne is in the temple, and is also the high priest performing the sacrifices for us during this 1,000-year reign. And to some Christians, this is kind of a surprising thing here, because it's like, well, what do you mean sacrifices during the Millennium Kingdom? Well, you got to read your scripture. If you go from chapter 40 of Ezekiel all the way to the end of the book in chapter 48, you're going to see this is all about the things that are going to be going on during the Millennium Kingdom. To give you a quick outline of chapter 40 to 48, chapter 40 covers the gates of the temple, the outer court of the temple, the inner gates, the inner court. Chapter 41 goes on to the measurements of the temple. Chapter 42 continues with the outer court being described. Chapter 43 is the glory of God, where God, like he did at the time of Moses, in a pillar of fire enters into the east gate, into the temple, to be back there, right in the temple. Chapter 44 goes on to the 3 different groups of people: the people that can actually serve in the presence of God, those who can only serve in the outer court, and why, and are not allowed into the presence of God, and those who are not allowed into the temple at all, and why. Ezekiel 45 goes on to talk about the land apportioned. Basically, the land that's given to the prince and the Gentiles that are joined to him, and how he gives property to the Levites, and he gives property to these Gentiles that have joined themselves to him, and that he has this property throughout Jerusalem there. When you get into chapter 46, it goes into the sacrificial offerings that are being made, and how the temple is closed throughout the week and it's only opened on the Sabbath, on Saturday. And then when you go into chapter 47, it goes on to about the living water, about this river of living water that comes from the throne that's in the Ezekiel's temple, goes to the right side of the altar where the sacrifices are being made, and flows out the west gate, and then it flows out both to the east and to the west. And this water, everywhere it goes, it brings life, and that there's 12 trees on each side of this river of life, trees of life that give forth their fruit every month, and that this water goes into the Dead Sea and brings it to life, and restores all the sea life into this Dead Sea that were in the seas. It says that every sea creature that was in the seas is now here, and that you have fishermen who are fishing and catching fish all throughout here in the Dead Sea because of the life that these living waters brought to it. And then in Ezekiel chapter 48, it goes into the divisions of the lands in terms of which property each of the 12 tribes gets in the nation of Israel. And this is events that are taking place throughout and during this entire Millennium Kingdom that's going on. There's a couple of little points that I want to touch on, and in terms of this Millennium Temple that's going on that Ezekiel writes about. A couple of things that I think are important and significant. The ones that bring the most controversy, I think, is the fact that people are saying, well, I don't get it. Why are there being sacrifices? Didn't Jesus do it all on the cross? Well, Jesus is the one doing the sacrifices here. As it's spoken of in the scriptures, it tells you that in the Old Testament, they looked forward by faith to what Jesus would do on the cross. What you find in the Millennium Kingdom is that we are looking back as a memorial to what Jesus did on the cross. And I think part of this is depicted when you look at some of the descriptions in the temple that's being built here. One of the things descriptive about this temple, it talks about the decorating, that these doors, these walls are decorated with palm trees, with cherubs in between the palm trees. But the cherubs have two faces, not four faces like you see in Ezekiel. They have the face of a lion and the face of a man. Well, where's the face of the eagle and the ox, right? Now, if you were to look at the faces on these cherubim, you've probably heard different messages in terms of the lion being the king of the beasts was depicted in the Gospel of Matthew as Jesus, King of the Jews. That Mark depicted Jesus the servant, the ox. That Luke depicted Jesus the Son of Man, and that John depicted Jesus the Son of God, depicted his deity by the eagle, right? So where's the servant and the Son of God? Well, you got to understand, Jesus' ministry during this Millennium Kingdom is not Jesus the servant. He did that when he came the first time. Now he comes as king and priest. That is Jesus the king and Jesus the priest. And that's the face of the man and the face of the lion that are depicted here in the Ezekiel temple. Now, as we continue to go on through here, one of the things you start looking at as you're seeing in this is, and I want to pick carefully in here the things that are most significant, I think, because of the fact that I have to keep this video limited and I can't just cover everything on it. There's a lot of different things about the sizes and the dimensions of the temple. There's a lot of detail described in here. Not just the designs that are in it, but everything is for a specific reason. The fact, like I said, that Jesus is doing the sacrifice, and you say, well, sacrifices were done away with. He did it all on the cross, right? Well, if you look at it, in the Old Testament, God said in Isaiah chapter 2, he said, I abhor your sacrifices and your new moon feasts and your Sabbaths. Well, wait a sec. Who gave them the sacrifices and the new moon feasts and the Sabbaths? Well, God did. Well, why does he abhor them? He says, because what I want is mercy and compassion. There was nothing wrong with the sacrifices. They were necessary, but what he really wanted was an attitude of heart. Well, it doesn't change here in the Millennium Kingdom. He still wants an attitude of heart, but if anybody gives tithes, you're still making sacrifices. That's a sacrifice to God to show him that he's more important than your money. And in the same way, the sacrifices that are being done in the Millennium Kingdom, it's an agricultural society again. Once again, they're showing God that he's more important than the wealth that he brings them. They're giving them the percentage of their wealth that comes in, and this is part of the system he set up. And if you look through it, he was trying to teach an attitude of heart in the Old Testament, and that's what he's trying to teach here in the New Testament as well, is an attitude of heart. I think one of the things I want to touch on a little bit is where he goes on to talk about those that are able to enter into the inner chambers to serve God, and he talks about them being the sons of Zadok among the sons of Levi to minister to the Lord, and that because of the fact that they abhorred the things that were done in the temple. The other group that are not allowed to go into the inner court before the presence of God, but can only worship in the outer court to serve, was because of the fact that they allowed the Gentiles to trodden the outer court underfoot. Evidently, this tribulation temple that happens during the tribulation turns into a Disneyland. and it turns into a thing for buying and selling. If you recall, when Jesus took the cords and made a whip and chased out the money chasers, it's written, my Father's house will be a house of prayer. And in the same way, that's what happened in there, where the abomination and desolation came in because of the things that they did in the temple, where they turned it into, a marketplace. And what you see in chapter 9 of Ezekiel is where, when God brings in the abomination and desolation, he has them mark the 144,000 with the seal of God, with the name of God and the name of his city, and says, you know what, they'll be protected, make sure, but then go and wipe out everybody else, starting with the elders in the temple, and then wipe out every man, woman, and child, showing no mercy. And this was basically because of the abominations that they did in the temple of God, that even in the tribulation temple, it's still the temple of God. And if you recall, that's the key marker from Daniel that started this 70th week for the clock to start ticking again as it goes through. Now, as I mentioned before, and those that are not allowed to enter the temple basically are those that are not circumcised in heart and flesh. Now, if you notice, he says heart and flesh. Because, see, Paul talks about the important thing of the circumcision was the circumcision of the heart, more so than the circumcision of the flesh. And so you have some that would be considered uncircumcised by Jews, but yet God says, look, if they're circumcised in heart, that circumcision's sufficient. Now, as we continue on, there's the area and the property that's given to the prince that he divides up for the Levites and that he divides up for the Gentiles that were joined to him. And this chart you're looking at right here is these areas in the division that he talks about that goes in through that. When we get towards the last chapter, when we get to the last chapter of the book, it goes into the division of Israel. Now, if you notice this chart here, this is the division of Israel and to each of the tribes that they're given to. And this is showing the way the land is divided up. And this is all leading towards, this is during this time where it says, the child shall live to be 1,000 years old. And if a man dies at 100, he'll be considered accursed. Well, why is that? Well, that's because right now you're running on God's law. Man's life's extended out like it was prior to the flood. But those that rebel against God, it's immediate judgment. This is in Ezekiel 43, 9, I think 9, 10, 11, 12 is what I'll cover. And it says, now let them put away their whoring and their dead bodies and their kings far from me, and I will dwell in their midst forever. As for you, son of man, describe to the house of Israel the temple, that you may be ashamed of their iniquities, and they shall measure the plan. And this is a lot of why this is written in here, so that Israel, who recognizes the Messiah and weeps for, sees him whom they pierced, and weeps for one as their own son. And it says, and if they are ashamed of all that they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement, its exits and its entrances, that is, its whole design, and make known to them as well all its statutes, and its whole design, and all its laws, and write it down in their sight, so that they may observe all its laws and all its statutes to carry them out. This is the law of the temple. The whole territory on the top of the mountain all around shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the temple. Now, the significant things I wanted to point out also is this river of life that flows from the temple of Ezekiel that he describes here. That has the trees of life on both sides. One of the significant things I think on this is that this is actually something that is both during the Millennium Kingdom and continues on post-millennial, when God destroys the heavens and the earth, creates a new heaven and a new earth. But this river of life still continues during this post-millennial kingdom in, the new heaven and the new earth. When the new Jerusalem comes down, this river of life is flowing from the new Jerusalem, and you still have the 12 trees with the 12, trees of life with the fruit that gives forth every season. And anyway, I think I've covered enough in here about the Millennium Kingdom for right now. And I think that we'll go on to, in the next video, we'll continue in chapter 20 of Revelation to the end of this Millennium Kingdom that leads into, once again, the Gog-Magog war of chapter 38. And I will touch on that, and I'll see you back here at Inspired Word.